back on track.
Okay, we are on the air on YouTube.
At Legacy, we create an environment that I would want my grandparents to be a part of.
My son brought me here before my husband died. And this is the one that he said was really the best. But when I got here, I looked at all of the residents and I thought, how am I ever going to get acquainted with all of these people?
We use our welcoming committee and our resident lifestyle profile to make the residents feel welcome and a part of the community as soon as possible.
Well, I got to the point where I could name everybody in here.
When I see the residents, I see my grandparents, and it's just as much like family to me.
You know, I have a large family, but now I have a larger one.
At Legacy, you're not just a resident, you're part of a family.
Okay, I'm in the logo, so I am ready when they are. Okay, I'm coming to you now. You are on.
All right, we'd like to get started and like to welcome everyone out for our city council meeting tonight. To get us started, we've asked Matthew Anderson if he'd come up and give us our spiritual thought, and just walk right up there, yep, and face us. Sorry, you get to look at us.
All right. Well, guys, it certainly is a privilege to be here. And being relatively new to Utah, and especially new within the last 3 years, coming November, be 3 years we've lived in Spanish Fork, we've been richly blessed as we've integrated into this city, and we absolutely love it. So also thank you for the sweet stoplight out there at 2550 or 2600, whatever you call it now. I got to use that today, and that thing is awesome. Praise God. Love it. You know, times have changed. I don't know how you've experienced things here in Spanish Fork, but from the, you know, I'm not a very old guy, but in my few years on this earth, values have changed. Values have changed a lot. And I think as I see how people pay respect to property and possessions, those things have changed as well. You know, there was a time when we would look at somebody else's property as more valuable than even our own. So if somebody entrusted us with their child or with their car or with something for a time, we would treat it better than if it was our own. But it seems like today we live in a culture where we even say, treat it like it's your own. You know, that's supposed to be a good thing, treat it like it's your own. But I think the right kind of value for us to have as Christians is to treat other people's possessions as though they are better than even our own. And I think about how this relates to this city, or really any city. You know, we're here for only a short time, right? I mean, we're all just passers through when it comes to our existence here on this earth. 80, 90 years, hey, we're doing great, right? The book of James says that our lives are like a vapor or like a puff of smoke. We're here today and gone tomorrow. And, you know, we really ought to make the most of it. And but that being said, you know, we're just passing through. We're temporary residents here on this earth. And how awesome would it be if we actually considered the place where we lived as though it belonged to somebody else, and we treated it as though it were better than our own. You know, I think about how God gave a word to his people when they were temporary citizens in Babylon. And I think it might be good for us as residents of Spanish Fork to think of ourselves as temporary residents. But he gave them this word in Jeremiah 29, 5 and 7. He said, build houses and live in them. Plant gardens and eat their produce. Take wives and have sons and daughters. Take wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage that they may bear sons and daughters. Multiply there and do not decrease. But seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare you will find your welfare. And I think there's some strategic words of wisdom for us if we would actually consider ourselves temporary residents, those who are passing by. You know, what this word is telling us is that we have an amazing privilege to bless and to seek the welfare of this city. We have an amazing privilege to pray on behalf of this city, to pray for the welfare of this city. What an amazing privilege. And then on the other side of that, we have the opportunity to receive the blessings of the city. You know, you as council members have dedicated a portion of your lives to seek the welfare of the city. And I just want to thank you for that. And for those of the rest of us who are here, maybe even petitioning things for our own welfare or for our own benefit, may we take into consideration the words of Jeremiah, that we would seek to be a blessing and provide welfare to the city. Would you bow your heads with me as we begin our time together? Father, we come to you in the great name of our Savior Jesus, recognizing that we're really only here for a short period of time. But in the time that you have allotted, may we be the kinds of people who seek the benefit, the blessing, and the welfare of this city, this great city that we live in. May we treat it not as though it's our own possession, but as though it's someone else's. And in reality, Father, the earth is yours and all that's in it. This earth is your possession. This city belongs to you. And we want to treat and bless this city as though it were yours and not our own. We love you and we thank you. We pray for your great blessing, that you would offer a spirit of wisdom as items are discussed and challenges are presented this evening. And we do pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. Okay, I've asked Councilman Gordon to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Would the audience please rise? Please repeat the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
Okay. Oh, we have one of those fun things we get to do. Kent, come on up.
I am glad to be here today and introduce our Employee of the Quarter. It's been nominated for outstanding service and work for the city. Pam Bradley. Nominated by her peers. Pam's just recently been promoted to our office supervisor in customer service in our utility office. She does an excellent job, and I'm excited that the rest of the employees had an opportunity to see how well she is and how well she performs in her capacity, and present to you the Employee of the Quarter for Pam Bradley. It's just great.
All right. Awesome.
Thank you. Congratulations.
No, the nomination. What was said about it?
What you do.
You want to read? Yeah, I think if it's appropriate. Is it appropriate? It's good to embarrass her. We got her husband in. All right. You're welcome.
I printed off the nomination, and Seth would like me to read it. So,
Oh, okay.
you ready? If I can get my eyes to focus on this. Pam was promoted to a new position in June. This is a rather quick promotion when Pat took another job opportunity down at the police station. As everyone is aware, July is a very hectic month for everyone in the city. The utility office has gone through many changes, and Pam has taken her new responsibility with the new employee crew, with the many girls, with the many vacations to schedule. She only had 2 weeks to learn Pat's job, and once Pat left, she had to maintain her own job while training all the new employees that were hired. In personal conversations I've had with Pam, she is consistently trying to think of ways to make things better and make the morale and the efficiency in her office and department. From my observation from the payroll and the HR side of things, Pam has an excellent in adapting to the new job and change that she's had. As the new supervisor, she has taken on an active role in understanding the ACA rules and regulations. She has come to my office many times in associations to clarify what is able to be done to cover the department with the employees with vacation and other responsibilities. And her understanding the importance of this regulation and impressed the person who's nominated him. So with that, great work, Pam, and I'll let you have that opportunity to read that also. Okay? Nice work.
Nice job, Pam. We're very, really proud of all our employees, and that's just an example of one of our good ones right there. And so we're grateful for her, especially for her stepping up and taking over a tough job. So thank you. All right. Public comments. Anyone that would like to come up and address the mayor and city council, you're sure welcome to come on up and do that. Seeing none, I will go to council comments. Let's start with Councilman Scobes.
Mayor, we had the Veterans Council met just last week. They've already started preliminary planning for the Memorial Day celebration. Veterans Day on November 11th. They'll be going out, both the American Legion and the VFW at the different schools, elementary schools, junior highs and stuff here in Spanish Fork. And so they've got their teams and speakers and productions laid up for that. And so just really encouraging to see them working together to go out and just help teach the kids about patriotism, talk about the great things that veterans have done in our community, and that's all I have to report.
Great. Councilman Mendenhall.
Yes, we had a League of Cities and Towns board meeting last week that I attended up in Salt Lake. Talked about a couple of issues that will be in front of the legislature, and also a neat thing about the league doing some spotlights of cities that we are a member of, and they have a front page. I don't know if you call it a front page anymore, but it's the web page of the Deseret News. So if you go there, you'll see always on the Deseret News homepage a little video of a city, a member of the League of Cities and Towns, which we are one of, and will be featured at some point. But they're doing little stories of cool things happening in our communities, and it's going to be available right there on the Deseret News homepage. So that was a pretty neat thing they were excited about up there. We also attended remotely the Legislative Policy Committee meeting yesterday to kind of give us a roadmap of what issues will be discussed this upcoming session at the legislature as well. And then real quick on the Active and Healthy Community Grant, some really cool things happened this last week that we were able to be a part of. We want to thank publicly Riverview Elementary for inviting us down there to they have Red Ribbon Week going on that says say no to drugs, and it's pretty healthy to say no to drugs. And so they let us take 5-10 minutes and talk about the Active and Healthy Community Initiative here in Spanish Fork. I want to thank Tony Allman, who's the PTA gal down there that helped get that going, and Susan Chapman with our board as well. I want to thank Angie really quick. If we could pan the camera towards Angie, she doesn't get enough camera time, but if the camera could get on Angie, she really helped out the last minute of, it was my bad dropping the ball a little bit that we didn't, I called her on a Monday and said, Angie, in a couple hours we're gonna be down at Riverview Elementary. Can you help me out, get all this stuff together? And we only had a couple hours and she had it already in 30 minutes. So she's awesome to do what she does for all of us, but she really helped out and made that a success. And I want to thank the high school kids that came from Spanish Fork High School as well to help us out to get the word out there. And then also today, that kind of spurred on Park Elementary calling us up and saying, hey, come take some pictures today of what we're doing. They had the kids running around laps, and every lap that they ran, they got to mark an X off, and people were signed up for donations for every lap they ran. Some people are going to have to spend some money, whoever signed up for that in the community, because there was a lot of laps ran, and a certain Mrs. Leifson was up there leading the charge.
She certainly was.
She was whipping those kindergartners around, telling them to get going.
I came at the end and cheered them on for their picture.
She had them ready to go.
She was ready for their picture.
So would like to thank her and Principal Ryan Kay up there for being involved in the Active and Healthy initiative as well. It was fun to go up there and get a picture of the kids and see the kids be active and healthy. So a lot of good things happening with that movement in town, and more good things to come. So if you haven't got your green wristband, get your green wristband and take a picture and visit the webpage and keep that movement going. And that's all I have, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilman Argal.
Thanks, Mayor. I just, an update with the seniors. On Friday night, they had their Halloween dance down at the pavilion down to North Park, and it was well attended. Would just like to encourage anybody that would like to join the seniors to come down. It is kind of a membership drive right now. There's some good things going on. They have a meal on Mondays and Thursdays, a luncheon, and then on the first Friday of each month, they have a membership meal, and those meals are very good meals, cooked by Dixie in her kitchen. On Monday, the 31st, they're having a Halloween luncheon, dinner, to come dressed up as your favorite character for Halloween. Also, in the last little bit, the Senior Citizen Center has been connected to SFCN. It was not. They run fiber into the building and changed their phones over, which was desperately needed because there was about one working phone out of a 7 or 8. So now they're updated and on SFCN network. And then also just mention that there is the animal shelter that we belong to, that the 9 cities belong to in the county here. There is a job opening for a new director at the shelter, and that application is online at the county building. If anybody out there or here would have an interest in that, please fill out a resume and submit that to the shelter. Thank you, Mayor.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Beck.
Thank you, Mayor. A couple things. With the Chamber of Commerce, we had a ribbon cutting for The Joint Chiropractic. It's just down across from Costco, so we want to welcome them to the community. The owner lives here in Spanish Fork, so we're excited to have him serve us. Our Play Unplugged program, we have had Play Unplugged for 3 years now. This will be our last year, and we did it a little differently this year. Every school had one name drawn that participated in the program, and they win a bike. And so we are going to present those certificates. Walmart is helping with the bikes, and they will be presented, I believe, at the Veterans Assembly in November. I think that's the route we're going to go. So that'll be fun for the kids to get that, and then one of the schools will also get a pizza party. Our board elections are coming up in November, so we're currently accepting applications from any businesses that are members of our Chamber of Commerce. So we encourage everyone to just continue to apply that would like to be on the board of directors, and then we'll hold those elections in November. And then our trick or treat will be on Main Street in Spanish Fork, and that will be on Saturday, October 29th from 1 to 3 p.m. And that will be from Center Street to 4th North, where a lot of our local businesses will be handing out lots and lots of candy to trick-or-treaters. And also in Salem, they will have a trick-or-treat from the Salem businesses in the parking lot of Zoo Wire Fitness, and that will be at the same time, 1 to 3 on Saturday the 29th. And then the last thing, I just wanted to let you know, Mayor, that I get to be involved in a new SF-17 program.
No.
Sorry, guys. It's for women only. It's called Studio Chatter, and it is going to be on twice a month. We'll film it every other week, and it's just we're going to deal with women's issues. It's Natasha Lockhart, Afua, I think that is how you say her name, Afua Danes, and I were the 3 co-hosts. We filmed our first segment last week. Big Brat Boutique sponsored us. That means we went in, they clothed us, and gave us new clothes. It was super cool. So I'm giving a shout out to Big Brat.
Equality, you know,
No,
women only.
I want to give a shout out. Everyone go shop at Big Brat Boutique.
There you go.
So we'll talk about health, fitness, fashion, politics, business, just topics that women want to be a part of, and we want to really pull in a lot of our local residents. So we're super excited to have that, and that'll be on SF17 and YouTube. And that's all I've got.
So do you have 8x10 glossy autograph pictures?
They're getting printed right now.
Good deal. All right, Councilman Gordon, top that.
Well, Mayor, I just got a text from my wife. Officer Clint Peterson pulled over my daughter. She was driving her boyfriend's car because hers wouldn't start. And so he went and jumped her car for her, and she's home now. So I thought I'd report that.
Well, I'm sure she'll be excited to know that you let the whole world know about that.
I hope he gave her a ticket, whatever she was doing. But we have awesome police officers. We had an opportunity. I wanted to congratulate as well Pam for the Employee of the Quarter. We had a dinner with all of our employees a couple weeks ago, and they're just the best there is. And we love our employees here in the city, and they do wonderful, incredible things. It's just fun to be with them every chance that I get. I just love to be around them. I wanted to also thank Matthew Anderson for coming from Utah Valley Church. That was great of him on short notice. I called him last night. And if you may notice that I shaved my beard, Mike. Anderson status, congratulations.
I let him know. I asked him what his secret was.
Incredible. Mayor, we had an airport meeting a couple weeks ago. Wanted to ask you, what do you think the fastest car speed was at the Planes, Trains, and Automobiles event in 3/4 of a mile?
You asking me?
I'm asking you. How fast do you think he got going? It was a yellow Lamborghini.
Ooh, 110.
184. You were way off. 184 miles. So we had sort of a recap meeting, and things went really well. We do that event every 2 years, and there's discussion of possibly doing it every year because the attendance is growing. It's a wonderful event and a lot of fun. Those that won the free airplane rides were able to redeem those this last Saturday, and they gave 77 young kids free airplane rides, and it was a tremendous event, and the kids just glowing from ear to ear. So great things happening down at the airport. Also, the garbage. We had a South Utah Valley meeting a couple weeks ago, and we approved the purchase of the Bayview landfill. The $5.7 million purchase went through in our New Era meeting up in Ogden, as well as here in Springville with our counterparts, and that's an exciting, big purchase that's happened for the district that will help us stay solvent with our garbage rates and things of that in the future. So looking forward to getting all that finalized. There's some walkthroughs and things that are taking place as we speak, and we'll get all that paperwork signed. So, and that's all I have, Mayor.
Great. I appreciate that. Good things happening here in Spanish Fork, and we appreciate our council members here going through their board meetings. And, everybody says, well, let's see, city council, you only go twice a month, city council meeting. But you realize that these council members and myself, we all have different assignments and boards that we serve on. So we could go do 2, 3, 4 different board meetings a month, plus our city council meetings. So there's a lot involved here, and I appreciate the service that these guys do and the way they fulfill their assignments. Okay, we're going to move down to Spanish Fork 101, General Election Information, Kent Clark.
Did you know there's an election this year?
God, who would have thunk it?
Who would have think? It's not a city election, so there's no councilman seats up for grabs right now on the ballot. So it's not a city election, so it's not being conducted by me as the election officer for the city. But the information I have is to help our residents learn about the elections for this year just a little bit on some of the mechanics that we would normally give to our public. But because it's not my election this year, it's the county's election, I'm going to share with you some of that information. So it's under the direction of the county, not under the direction of the city this year. Too many clicks. Okay, I got a quiz for you. Everybody here can take the same quiz. See how savvy you are. First question. When is Election Day? Is it A, the first Tuesday in November? Sounds like it might be. Or the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November? Or doesn't matter, I'm not registered to vote. What do you think?
Two.
Two.
First
The
Tuesday
answer
after
is 2 is correct. The answer is 2. It is, and the time on it begins at 7 and it goes till 8. Got that?
That's the 8.
Oh, that's a test.
Question, how much is 7 plus 1?
Okay, so where can I check my registration to vote? Okay, number 3, this is what the website looks like. Okay, the website looks like this. It's voteutah.gov, vote.utah.gov. You can hear that over and over again. The county sends most all their information that they have is right to this website, and there's a couple spots on it that I'm going to show you in just a second. Where can I get registered to vote? Somewhere in Hawaii, Spanish Fork City Hall, Utah County Elections Office in Provo, or vote.utah.gov. What do you think? No? Actually, it's number 3 and number 4. Trick question. I have to give bonus points. You see, you could win on both of those. So you can go to the election office over there and register in person in that office, or you can go online and register at vote.utah.gov. Okay? This is what the website looks like, and right here you can see to see if you're registered, you put your address in, the city, and your zip, and click submit, and if that address, that'll tell you where to vote. Now, if you want to know where, I'm trying to focus up there, where to vote early, there's a couple of different buttons on here as far as checking on where to vote. Register to vote right up here. There it is. I lost where it was at. So if you click on this one right here, you can actually go online and register to vote, kind of like you do when you get your driver's license. There's still some questions and stuff for you to fill out.
So when you put an address in there, who does it bring up? Everyone that address that's registered? Because
what this part right here is actually tells you where to vote.
this is the where to vote.
This is the where to vote. Up here is finds out if you're
Registered.
registered
Okay,
or not.
I'm with you. Thank you.
Okay, next question. When are the deadlines to register to vote? You can by mail by October 11th. What's today?
18th.
That looks like that was over. In the clerk's office by November 1st. Online at that vote.utah.gov, November 1st, or all the above? Answers, all the above. Of course, the first one, that mail-in date's already passed, so if you have a mail-in you want to register, it's too late. You send it in, you will not be registered. You'll have to vote provisional at the voting place. Okay, when is early voting? Yesterday, today, tomorrow? Okay. Number 4, if the clicker will work. Not going. Take the next one. So early voting is throughout the whole county, but our city office here has been selected that you can early vote here, and it's for 9 days before the election. So you can see it's 4 days starting October 25th for those 4 days, and then you got all the next week for the 5 days, so 9 days. The time is from 12 noon until 5 p.m. on each of those days, and it's right here in the foyer of the City Hall building. The county will have their electronic ballots, the touch screens in order to vote. Okay, how do I request an absentee ballot? If I'm going to be gone, or you can request an absentee ballot, say you don't want to go stand in line, you can request a ballot beforehand. So how do I do that? You send up a prayer. No? Or you have to have a written application? Yes. You have to have a written application sent into the county. And where do I get that written application? At vote.utah.gov, or you can go to the Utah County Election, their site themselves, but their site will refer you to this site. Where can I see what's on my ballot? So I can see who's running for President of the United States. Who are the other choices that you might have to choose from? On your city bill, on your county property tax notice, or vote.utah.gov. Vote.utah.gov. So that's a pretty important site to remember is vote.utah.gov. Has registration, where to vote, how to register to vote, has your ballot on there, has early voting on there. And so this site right here is an important one for our residents to go and look at if they have questions about this election season. So when in doubt, vote.utah.gov. Thank you.
Kent, thank you.
Kent.
Good job.
In fact, I just had someone ask me yesterday about early voting and if Spanish Fork was going to do it here. So that answers the questions. Okay. I would entertain a motion to approve the consent items.
So moved.
Second.
A motion by Councilman Gordon, a second by Councilman Mendenhall. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Passes. New business. We have some board appointments on our planning commission board. I'd like to re-up Brad Wilkinson and Tracy Tagg. This will be their second term. They can serve 2 terms on that board, and I would recommend them for board appointments. Yes, I need it.
I'll make a motion to approve those.
Thank you.
A second.
Got a motion by Councilmember Beck and second by Councilman Mendenhall. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Can I just really quickly say how much I appreciate that committee? They're awesome. They really help prepare and do a lot of homework that helps us make good choices. So a shout out to them. Thank you.
I didn't.
She asked for
I didn't.
permission, but
She
you
asked
didn't
for
say it was
permission and
okay.
then just
Yeah.
went right into it.
I thought you leaned
Yeah.
back and shook your head yes.
You reveal the film and see.
The celebrity status.
There you go. All right, moving on to new discussion. We got something wrong with our sound system going, getting some backfeed. Okay, we've got Walt Baker to do a presentation on nutrition limits for Utah Lake. Would you like to come up, or where's Chris? Do you want to introduce him, or you just want to come up? All right, whatever here.
Okay, we're glad to have Walt Baker here with the state. He is here to present some of their findings and what their plans are with some of the regulations that we have to follow with our wastewater treatment plant at Utah Lake and what we let go into Utah Lake. And so we appreciate him coming, and he's with the Division of Water Quality.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you. Is this advancing here? Anybody wants some music surgery?
Mayor and City Council, I'm very pleased to be here with a number of my staff. Let me introduce a couple of others that are with me here. Erica Gaddis, who's the Deputy Director of the Division of Water Quality. Scott Daly, he is our watershed coordinator here for Utah Lake, a new position that he's got, made even more exciting by the events of this past summer with water quality issues in Utah Lake. Dan Griffin is the permit writer, so he's got a lot of close relationship with your wastewater treatment plant and other individuals who run the facility, and he's the one that writes the permit under which that treatment plant operates. It's a pleasure for us to be here. We want to take a moment to talk not only about Utah Lake, but about requirements relative to nutrients and why we ought to be concerned about nutrients. I'm the director of the Division of Water Quality. I go back some time with the division. I can recall when I first came to work here, Spanish Fork was building an extensive addition to the wastewater treatment plant in the mid-'80s. Richard Heap, the city engineer, was involved there, and we had the pleasure of working with Richard for many years. Let me tell you what the messages are, and where's the
kind of down this direction is where the computer is. Here, there you go. You want me to...
Okay, I think I got it that time. So if I was to identify some of the take-home messages that we'd like you to leave with today, is accommodating future growth and protecting our water resources requires that we address nutrient pollution. It is the biggest source of pollution to our lakes and rivers in the state of Utah. We began this nutrient strategy in 2008 with a bunch of stakeholders. If I'm not mistaken, Leland Myers, was he here right before we were? Did you have a work meeting before this meeting with Leland? Yes. Okay, Leland was very much involved. In fact, one of the principal authors of our nutrient strategy. And if you've got questions as we go through these slides, let's take them as we go so that you don't lose track of them, and we can, while that issue is kind of hot on your minds, that we can address that. We're going to talk about a technology-based effluent limit for phosphorus, and that has gone into place in 2014, and by 2020, all the mechanical wastewater treatment plants that discharge in the state will be required to meet a 1 milligram per liter end of pipe. So you can write that down. 1 milligram per liter will be the effluent limit for all these wastewater treatment plants that discharge, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, what that means. That is a technology-based limit, so that is not a standard in the water. That's what treatment plants need to meet end of pipe, and it takes a particular technology or application of a technology to do that. We experienced an unprecedented harmful algal bloom this past summer in Utah Lake. In fact, I think it was only this week that the health department issued an all clear. I guess it's safe to go water skiing if anybody wants to do that in Utah Lake right now. But in any event, that was unprecedented. And although we saw an episode of that in 2014, and even in years prior, we've had algal blooms, that green color in the lake. This was different than those other times. In 2014, we saw a little bit of a problem. We saw a massive problem, not only in Utah Lake, Schofield Reservoir, Payson Lakes, Manaway Reservoir, and other water bodies, and there are reasons for that, and we'll get into that a little later on. So kind of covered that. Unless we are able to address the food source associated with the harmful algal blooms, we're not going to be able to really solve that problem or make inroads into the problem. So without nutrient reduction, which is the food source for the algae, then we're going to see larger algal blooms and more persistent algal blooms. Certainly water temperature plays into that. There's no question. Shallow waters that heat up, no question that plays into that. And we had a shortage of water this year in Utah Lake. But the contributing factor, the major contributing factor, we believe, is the food source that is feeding the algae. So we're going to be working with Spanish Fork City. We're talking with all of the, we've met with the Utah Lake Commission. I sit on that commission. You've got a representative on that. Chad, you're on that commission. We're going to be working with all the communities of how to address this and what's the science behind this and what can we do better than we're doing now. Is there anything we can do to insulate ourselves from this problem? So here's why we're here today, to take questions. We want to share information. We're going to talk about not only our nutrient reduction strategy, but we're going to talk about a study on Utah Lake that we're undertaking right now. We want to talk about this technology-based effluent limit. The last time we were here presenting that to the council was in July of 2010. I don't know if anybody was on the council at that time.
Yeah, I remember it well.
I bet you do.
I was there.
All of it?
Yeah, I'm sure I can.
We've also had a presentation to all the Utah Lake communities back in 2013 at the county courthouse. But we're trying to get the word out and talk about what this strategy is. And then we want to introduce our Utah Lake study and what the goal of that study is and who we are engaging in that study. So, nutrient pollution, what the heck is it? Nutrients are good things. We take supplements to get nutrients. We put nutrients on our plants. And when we do that on our lawn, and every spring we do that, it induces growth because plants need nutrients. So the nutrients that we're principally talking about when I refer to nutrients, phosphorus and nitrogen. And so just as when we put nutrients on our lawn and we put the water on our lawn, our grass grows. And the same thing happens in our waters. We put nutrients in our waters. If it is excessive nutrients, plant life in the water is going to grow. And so that's what gives the green hue to to our waters, to Utah Lake, and other waters, and it causes problems in excess. Nutrients are good for us, but in excess, not a good thing. So when in our water systems, if we see nitrates, and that's a derivative of nitrogen, a nutrient, when we see nitrates in our water system, that is a bad thing. There are limits of that. It can cause oxygen deficiencies, especially in babies. We call that blue baby syndrome. Ammonia, also an element of nitrogen. It is toxic to aquatic life. So we have standards that protect our fisheries from too much ammonia. You've got an ammonia limit at your wastewater treatment plant so that we don't have excessive levels of that toxicant being discharged. Cyanotoxins, what we experienced in Utah Lake this last year, not just an algal bloom, but a harmful algal bloom with cyanotoxins. That's what that means. It's a particular type of bacteria. It's really not an algae. It's a particular type of bacteria, and it will cause liver damage. It will cause brain dysfunction. It will cause sickness, and we'll get into that of what we saw in Utah Lake later on. So you can see all of these things. These first three pictures are not somewhere else, not taken somewhere back east or in some third world country. All of those pictures are taken in Utah. We've had cattle kills drinking out of water that you could not find a home around that, but still excessive nutrients because of animals grazing around the lake, etc., that can cause death to livestock.
Where was that?
This is over in Duchesne County, outside of Duchesne up towards the Uintas.
Well, that wasn't Utah Lake.
No, that's not. These are not necessarily Utah Lake. I don't know where the aquatic life one. The middle one is Utah Lake. The ascetics one. That first one's Schofield this year. That's Schofield this year. So we had thousands of fish die at Schofield, and birds as well. We didn't see that at Utah Lake. So indirect effects, it takes the oxygen out of the water. Hence, it could have been a toxicity problem for the fish. More likely than not, they got robbed of oxygen. And when you and I, if the weather gets bad in Salt Lake City, where I live in Davids County now, just moved there, but if the weather gets bad there, my wife is asthmatic, we head to Park City, where the weather and the air is better. Fish can't do that. They can swim deeper. They can swim to the other side. They've got nowhere to hide when there's oxygen deficiencies in a water body. Results in nuisance conditions, the yuck factor that we see in our waters that have algal blooms, and taste and odor. It might be of interest to the council and mayor to know that Utah Lake, at the mouth of the Jordan River, it is classified as a drinking water source. And Jordan Valley Water Conservancy District takes water, or has the ability to take water and put it through their treatment plant. They do not do that. They did that one time, and because of taste and odor problems associated with the algal problems that we've got in Utah Lake, they don't take their water from that surface water source anymore. They go through wells to bring it through because of the taste and odor problems that people just won't drink it. So what's everybody else? I mean, we've got a nutrient strategy in Utah. What's the rest of the country doing? This is a big deal nationally. If you read the papers, 4 counties in Florida this year, while we were wrestling with the Utah Lake algal problems, 4 counties in Florida were identified as disaster areas, much larger areas than we're looking at in Utah Lake because of harmful algal blooms. Oregon, same kind of thing. Washington, same kind of thing. California and the Midwestern states, episode after episode of harmful algal blooms spiking this year. States are doing what we are doing, and we're one of these that is on the right-hand side, developing this technology-based phosphorus effluent limit. So there is a strategy to control excess nutrients. The colored states there, the darker, deeper colored states, have water bodies that have nitrogen and phosphorus standards already developed. We are identified as a white state, and about half or a little less than half the states have not developed standards. Standards is not equal to a technology-based limit. Standard means they've done the science, they've said, we've got a standard that protects all of the water bodies in the state or some of the water bodies in the state. We're working towards developing standards, but until we can do that, and it will be a lengthy, arduous, expensive proposition to go water body by water body, to buy us time until we get the standard, we've decided to implement a technology-based limit like many other states. And we're not out of step with many states. Some are more strict. Chesapeake Bay, because of the problems they're experiencing in the Bay, they've got a more strict number, in Maryland as well. So if we lived in Wisconsin, if this was Spanish Fork, Wisconsin, instead of Spanish Fork, Utah, Wisconsin has got a pretty aggressive approach to how they deal with this. They have identified limits, and the permit limit is 5 years. So your permit comes up when, Dan? 2023. So you, 2023? Okay. These are five-year limits on these permits. And so what Wisconsin says, at the end of 5 years, you need to hit 0.8. Now that's not too much more restrictive than our 1 milligram per liter, only a little bit more. But after 10 years, you've got to hit 0.6 end of pipe. After 15 years, 0.5. So that's half of where we are. In the interim, if you don't hit that, you can seek a variance. But the variance allows you to have higher levels of phosphorus being discharged, but there's a cost you pay, $50 a pound for the phosphorus. If this was Spanish Fork, Wisconsin, that would be a $1.84 million a year bill that Spanish Fork would be paying, because your phosphorus levels are a little about 3.8 milligrams per liter, much, much above the target. Please.
Well, a couple questions that come to mind.
Sure.
I have others with the other sides, but just this one in particular, I'm trying to understand the correlation between Wisconsin and Utah. The biodiversity is, I mean, they're very different regions of,
sure.
of the United States.
Sure.
Ecosystems are very different, things like that. And so I'm looking, our water bodies, Utah Lake has been discussed already, or at least mentioned already, but our water bodies in the state of Utah are very different, the way that they're fed.
Sure.
Things like that. You have the Appalachian Mountains, which are relatively close to Wisconsin, whereas we're right dab smack in the middle of the Rockies. And so I'm looking at that saying...
Apples and oranges, maybe.
Well, yes. Plus,
let me speak to that, but
okay,
go ahead.
Let's go with that one first.
Okay.
Yes.
This is a technology-based limit. So this is not a in-stream or in-lake standard that is need to be made. They're working towards that as we are in Utah. They're working towards that in Wisconsin. So they've developed these technology-based limits and say, we don't care who you are, what waters you're around, what lake, what stream you discharge into. This is the across-the-board limit because the technology is available, it's affordable, and ergo, this is where we want you to be, all wastewater treatment plants. And so treatment plants have the ability to make the decision, well, do we upgrade the plant, or do we want to apply for this variance? Now, the limit is $650,000, and that money then goes into controlling non-point sources of pollution, which are also contributors to nitrogen and phosphorus excess. And a non-point source is like runoff from our streets, runoff from the golf course, runoff from our lawns. It's usually a weather-induced event that brings those nutrients into our waters, not a wastewater treatment plant or an industry that discharges out of a pipe. So regardless of the diversity of the waters and the elevation and everything else, the ecosystem, the technology-based limit it's an apples to apples kind of comparison in Wisconsin and here and other states that have a technology-based limit.
Okay, now a question I have with that, because you said that the technology is there. Technology, as we know, improves.
Sure.
Cell phones, when I was younger, were these bricks, and now they're much more powerful than
Sure.
computers that filled rooms. So the technology will improve. You mentioned that it's affordable. Affordable is a relative term.
Sure.
A city of 40,000 people like Spanish Fork can afford certain things that a city of 8,000 people can't. Likewise, Salt Lake City can afford much more than our city can. And so affordable and newer technologies, what does that really mean? It's affordable. And then what I'm looking as an elected body, what does that mean to our citizens?
Right. Let me bring some context to that. This is a cost impact study that was done back in 2010 as we embarked upon this. Because the first question we had, what's the cost and what's the benefit? So we did 2 studies, extensive studies, each of these taking about 18 months to do. This one was with all the mechanical wastewater treatment plants in the state that discharge, so all those that would be impacted by a technology-based limit. Looking at 4 different scenarios. Phosphorus removal being the first tier, phosphorus removal and nitrogen removal being another tier, and then variations on that, aggressive phosphorus and nitrogen removal or not aggressive. So the technology-based limit of 1 was the first tier of the ladder. So that we said that's where we want to start. That's where the adaptive approach comes in. And you're right. The cost differs depending on where you are on the spectrum. For Spanish Fork, the estimate here was $3.87 a month to be able to meet the 1 milligram per liter phosphorus limit through chemical phosphorus removal.
Now, $3.87 per citizen?
No, per household per month.
Per household.
The average in the state of Utah was $1.19 a month per household, because some, Salt Lake City, although it needs a pretty massive redo because of the age of its facility, it may be lower, just as you say, because it's got a population base that can sustain those increases more than others.
Okay.
That was a 2010? $3.80?
$3.87.
Now, sorry, I'm just going to throw a bunch of questions
please.
out at you as we discuss this. So, I'm looking at it thinking, okay, so $3.80 in 2010. Who knows with technologies and things what it would be today? It's certainly probably more as newer technologies develop. I'm still looking at it. For me, I teach my students cause and effect. Elementary school teacher, very basic cause and effect, if, then. And so I'm looking at some of this, some of these, when I taught 6th grade, we talked about the algal blooms last year when I taught 6th grade, and I've since moved to 4th. Cyanotoxins, I know it's cyanobacteria. And so some of the questions I have really can be encapsulated into one. Big question is parts per million we're looking at in water. We'll use Utah Lake because that's what directly affects our wastewater treatment facility. And so parts per million, we're looking at, at getting to the 1 milligram per liter.
That's the same as 1 part per million too.
Right, yeah. Right. And so, I'm looking at that and I'm wondering, I have to justify to my citizens an increase for what gain? And I say that because, okay, granted, Spanish Fork is releasing into Utah Lake, and so we're looking at technologies. That's one option. I'm sure there are others out there, but technology, what was it? Technology-based, okay, so technology-based is one way, although that's what's being presented so far. There are other things that put nitrogen and phosphorus into the water systems. You mentioned the runoff, for example. I rototill the leaves into my garden to gain the nitrogen back into my garden, and so there's an awful lot of ecosystem, awful lot of plants and stuff around Utah Lake. I need to be able to look at it and justify to my citizens. I have to raise your rates because the county, because the state, because of these regulations, but it affects only this percent, and how does that compare to the plant life, for example, that will die, that converts into nitrogen and phosphorus that would naturally be released into it. Now, we can pay the $50 per pound, and $650,000 will go to treat the plants that die and the nitrogen, which I've been around government for quite a long time, and I don't know that $650,000 would do really anything other than maybe pay 1 or 2 contractors to try to scoop plants before they die, and that would only last about a month. So I'm looking at how do I justify to my citizens, you're going to be paying more money for something that fixes what percent
Right.
of the problem is the question I have.
I'm going to give you the short answer,
Okay.
and maybe when, Eric and I are going to tag team here, so when I finish this part, she's going to come up. But the short answer is this, based on the studies that we've done, and we're going to hone in on this a little more when we get involved in the Utah Lake study, but we've done a study on Utah Lake back in the 2004, 2005 until about 2007 called a TMDL, or total maximum daily load, because it was a problem. Utah Lake was sick back then, and it is still sick. And so we did the initial study back then, identifying that 70-75% of the excessive nutrients are coming not from runoff, but coming from wastewater treatment plants, the 7 wastewater treatment plants that feed into Utah Lake. So that's the lion's share of the contributing source of those excessive nutrients. We will do a more refined study relative to the wet weather, how much is coming from when it rains and what's coming down the Provo River, when the Provo River actually goes into Utah Lake and it's not all being diverted, but what's coming off our lawns and gardens in the form of stormwater. We've done it's more sophisticated in the back of the envelope approach, but it's less than 7% of the total problem of excessive nutrients is coming from non-point sources. So we're trying to look at where the low-hanging fruit is and where the biggest bang for the buck is, and that is with controlling it at our wastewater treatment plants, we believe. But our Utah Lake study will help refine that.
Well,
Great questions.
Well, the question I have with that is, I know Geneva Steel, which is not a wastewater treatment facility, for X number of decades, had runoff off of its facilities, foundry, other different things that it had there. I don't know, and I don't know that anyone would know, there's a way to quantify how much nitrogen, phosphorus, who knows, arsenic, lead, other things had leached either from their facilities or just from simple runoff from being an industrial area into Utah Lake. And so my question with the study that you said started in 2004, 2005, that the wastewater facilities are 75% of the problem, that's on water that's been there, and then sediment that has all those things in it that may have been, I'm trying to understand the numbers so that if I have to pass on, these requirements to my citizens, how do I justify it and say, well, you had a large industrial that had regulations, but you talk to old timers that worked there for 30, 40 years, and they can tell you, oh yeah, pipes were open and stuff just dumped in and there was no regulation. How do we know that 75% of contaminated, I'll use that loosely, water is because of wastewater facilities when a large contributor had been there for 50, 60, 70 years? How do we take that water and say, wait, I recognize that color, it comes from this facility. Oh, this, you see what I mean? I'm trying to...
Let me take a swing at that, and then let me go through these.
Right on.
We've assessed both industrial, commercial, and municipal contributors to nitrogen and phosphorus excess. And so we regulate Chevron and ATK and Kennecott, all the industries that discharge to a water of the state, we regulate. There's only less than, I'd say there's probably 4 that even contribute to nitrogen and phosphorus. And some of those are like phosphate plants that'd be right in their wheelhouse. So Geneva would not be, even though I don't even know when Geneva closed, but it would have been early 2000s or I'm not sure when, but it would not have been, because of the nature of its business, a contributor of nitrogen and phosphorus. Heavy metals, some organic compounds perhaps, but not nitrogen and phosphorus. One thing you did mention, though, because of decades of us pumping excess nutrients into Utah Lake, there's going to be a lot of nutrients that have been sequestered in the soil. If Dr. Merritt was here into the sediment, he may have spoken about that a little bit. And there's no question that some of that phosphorus is being sequestered. It's not like nitrogen that can disappear into the atmosphere. Once phosphorus is discharged, it is still there. Its life just keeps on giving. It either is flushed downstream or it stays sequestered, or it's in the water column. It just doesn't disappear unless it's taken up by plants and you harvest the plants and get them out. The answer to your question, I guess, is Geneva Steel would not have been a contributor to this problem. It could have contributed to other water quality problems, but not this problem.
Because of their chemical.
Just because of what they're
signature.
discharging and what their business was about. Okay. EPA is very interested in this. This is a national problem, whether you're the Gulf of Mexico or Chesapeake Bay. And so this is the whole beginning and the end, if you will, of our technology-based limit. It is to hold the line. We've got to buy ourselves time to be able to develop the right standard, and that's a water body by water body approach. It allows for growth to occur and kind of dials things back so that we, for instance, Spanish Fork reducing its phosphorus load from 3.8 milligrams per liter to 1 milligram per liter. That will buy time, and as growth occurs, we won't be saying that we're exceeding where we were back in 2016, because we will have kind of put a little bit of a cap on that, allowed growth to catch up. We'll develop the site-specific nutrient standards on a priority basis. And one of our priorities right now is Utah Lake, because of its recreational abilities, because of the problem we're experiencing, because it does serve as a drinking water source and an irrigation source downstream. We'll get into that a little bit more. TMDLs happens when we have an impaired water. We've got a standing TMDL on Utah Lake right now because of excessive phosphorus. We'll continue trying to solve non-point source projects. Up at Main Creek that feeds into Deer Creek, the single biggest source of nutrient pollution was coming from Main Creek. We've got a tremendously successful non-point source project in partnership with other organizations that's occurring there, curtailing non-point source pollution that is going into Deer Creek and ultimately into the Provo River, and in times when it discharges into Utah Lake, it's reducing the amount of nutrients from non-point source. Let's see. We're going to protect our headwaters. So we're going to develop site-specific standards for all our headwaters. That will occur in 2017. We want treatment plants to optimize, and we've got some encouragements in our rules that would encourage them to optimize. Spanish Fork and pretty much every other wastewater treatment plant in the state has never had a nutrient criteria, never had to consider, unless it was ammonia, phosphorus and nitrogen have not been in their permits. So Spanish Fork and many others are to be applauded for meeting their permit limits, but unfortunately this source of pollution is not in any of those permits. So there was never a target. There was never, there was never a need to do that. The time and the need have come together. And do nothing. We just cannot sit back and do nothing about this. We will get the same results if we do. So I'm going to just look at all three of these and say there are three avenues that we could take. One is the water is impaired, so we go ahead and we try to rehabilitate the impaired waters, and that winds up having, and we can see Bear River and Echo Reservoir, and there have been other TMDLs relative to nutrients that we've employed. What happens when you come do that? You allocate a load to the point sources, and you allocate or a waste load to the point sources and a load allocation to the non-point sources, and then you work to meet those limits that have been imposed so that you can restore the water to where it needs to be, whether we drink it, recreate in it, it's a fishery, or we use it for agriculture. We need to protect our waters for those uses. It was interesting in the spiritual thought and the prayer that was offered today. We're very much stewards of our waters. The waters don't belong. People have water rights. The water belongs to all of us collectively as Utahns. And the state engineer meets those out for particular uses. But it is not owned by the person that owns the water right. They own a right. We own the water, both our surface water and our groundwater. And we just need to be good stewards of that. We develop numeric nutrient criteria, water body by water body, site-specific. This is why EPA has not developed a one-size-fits-all like they have for pretty much every other standard, is because the waters are unique. The states are unique, just as you said. And you pronounce your name Scobes?
Scobes.
Scobes. Just like you said, Councilman Scobes. these waters are different state by state, and they each need a site-specific limit. Or we do a technology-based limit. It's a hold the line. It is not, we've done the science and established a standard. It says, technology says we can do this in an affordable, whatever affordable is, manner, and we need to go towards that. This was the companion study to the cost study, and this was, what's the benefits? So what? If we do this, are we going to get a return on that investment? And the answer is yes, that we are. That Utahns value the water. Utahns are willing to pay if I'm not even a user of the water. We did a survey based on if you use water, if you boat, if you recreate, if you fish, if you walk by, if you go swimming. Those are the users of the water, and to them, it's worth more to them, $32 a month they would be willing to pay to protect our waters. On the lower end of the spectrum, it was, look, I don't have a boat. I never go camping or fishing. I don't use the water. I don't go hiking. But even they were willing to put an investment of dollars into protecting
Where
our
was
waters.
that study? How was that brought out to be that was $8 that people would say that?
This is based on surveys, willingness to pay that went out to households. It was conducted by the University of Wyoming in tandem with Utah State University. It's online. I'll give you the mayor.
Yeah, I'd be curious.
You can go in and look at this, but it's on our website, and it's an economic benefit of the nutrient reductions in Utah's waters. It was done about a year after this one.
Sorry, I have a question.
Oh, please.
Looking at the money again, Utahns are willing to spend that, but should they, or is it necessary? And my question with that is, so with technology based, let's say, and we haven't gotten to that yet other than it's $3-something up to who knows with current technologies, per month, per household. The question I have is, that is at least one way or what's being presented as to take care of the nutrients in the water. As you mentioned, let's see, warm water, deep water, or shallow water affects it. And so my thought is, okay, so we tell the citizens, according to some studies, some people had said you're willing to pay this much money. We'll shoot right in the middle of that and say technology's advanced. We're looking for future growth, and so it'll be $17 to $22 is what the normal household is going to have to pay. Said that you're willing to do it, at least by consensus of the population. We have unseasonably or non-traditional, better word, excuse me. We have non-traditional rain flows. We have non-traditional weather for what we have, and so we spend a portion of that, and I don't know what this technology would be. Let's say, just for sheer numbers, it's $100 million. So we spend $100 million to fix the nutrients that are going in there, to fix the algal bloom for the cyanotoxins that are there, this harmful algal bloom. And we have cooler weather, we have more water, so we have deep water and cooler weather, and so your cyanobacteria doesn't grow. It doesn't facilitate that growth, so we don't have the algal bloom. But I've now told my citizens, well, you've now paid for it, and something like this you'd have to bond, so it would be, it would be that plus interest. Do I now tell my citizens you don't have to pay it because there's no bloom? And it's not a direct correlation. We can't say because the technology is there, the bloom is now gone. Because if we get more water and it's deeper and cooler weather, if that exists for 10, 15 years, then just simple nature, we don't have the algal bloom. We don't have the toxins in the cyanobacteria. Not all cyanobacteria does produce toxins.
Right.
And so that's the question I have is, citizens, you've spent this money that's now worthless for a decade, 15 years, 20 years. And so I'm looking at that saying, so how do I get my citizens to swallow that? They're spending money on something that feasibly won't matter which tells me through, millions of years as I teach my students, things change and evolve in ecosystems. I'm looking at thinking, you said 2014 is where we had, algal blooms were pretty high, but not like they are. 75% of the algal bloom and the toxin was because of our wastewater facility, but there's no wastewater facility up at Payson Lakes you had mentioned.
Right.
And so,
Nor is there around Schofield.
Oh, no, there's not.
Nor is there Manaway.
But they were shut down the same as Utah Lake was.
Sure.
Without, and so up there it had to have been rain, snow, plant life, animal life, those types of things which naturally occur. And so just in my mind, again.
Let me see if I can answer some of those questions.
Okay, so yeah, those are several
questions
questions I'm throwing.
we need to separate that the purpose of controlling nutrients is to remove harmful algal blooms. I mean, even, for instance, we have standards for metals, and we say you can't discharge metals beyond this limit. I'm just choosing that as a pollutant, beyond this limit. Now, if you discharge metals to a water, I'm going to be able to swim there. I'm not going to know the difference between this water's got metals in it and this water doesn't, but it's toxic. Those metals are toxic to fish, and so it'll go into the sediment, they'll feed off the biota, they will ingest that, and those metals will go up the food chain, and then ultimately, if I eat the fish, there's a problem. And so that's why we put that standard there. So it's not simply, we need to do this to remove the harmful algal blooms, although I believe that will be a consequence of reducing the food source. There's the yuck factor. Golly, I don't like to go water skiing on Utah Lake, even when there's no harmful algal blooms, because the yuck factor is so high. In fact, in this study right there, the favorite place to recreate in the state was Utah Lake. The least favorite place to recreate in the state was Utah Lake. I mean, it was polar, that it was, I will never go there, or that's where we always go. And so there's a recreational aspect to that. There's an irrigation aspect as we put it down river, and we'll see that in some slides of what happened to the Jordan River as a result of the harmful algal bloom in Utah Lake. But it is just not about eliminating the harmful algal bloom. It is to protect the resource for recreation, for irrigation, as a fishery, and frankly, if Jordan Valley ever wanted to draw the water out of it. Let me try to go speed things up here a little bit. We could have gone to the eco-regional criteria instead of a technology-based limit. EPA said, here we are in Utah, and these are the eco-regions that you see, Ecoregion 2, forested ecoregion, and Zurich Western Ecoregion 3. You can see for lakes more stringent standards. These are in-stream standards, more stringent than what we're talking about for an end of pipe. Now, again, these are in-stream and in lake and not end of pipe. But if we would have embraced this, we wouldn't be talking about $3.87 a month for Spanish Fork or whatever resulted in it from the other communities to meet this in-stream. We need to back these numbers out. If that's the standard, we back it out with a model that we do to figure out what Spanish Fork has to treat to. So, it's not like this because these are in-stream, but it would not be a 1 milligram per liter. It would be probably 10 times that if these were the standards. We elected not to do that. We said we've got another approach, and that approach is our technology-based limit. So that means hitting that 1 milligram per liter by 2020. There are off-ramps. The communities, and some have already submitted variances, that it's an economic hardship, that it's unnecessary because downstream, if we hit this 1 milligram per liter, it will have no effect downstream, and so we don't need to do it. There's no value in doing it, and we're not going to do something that there's no value in. Or if they say, look, we need a little more time, to 2025 because we are going to upgrade our wastewater treatment plant and we're going to do a nutrient removal program, and we need a little more time, and we accord variances for that. These are some of the studies. I've mentioned 2 of them. There have been several other studies that we've done. So with that, I probably exhausted all of our time now, but let me turn a little time over to Erica to talk about what's going on in Utah Lake and where that takes us.
Thank you. Just state your name for the record, if you would, Erica. Full name.
My name's Erica Gaddis, the Division of Water Quality, and I'll just spend a few minutes. I thought the council would be interested in hearing a little bit about the algal bloom that we experienced this year in Utah Lake, and just wanted to make sure you're familiar with the guidelines that we are working under, and then also take some time to talk about this water quality study that we've launched, and we've just secured $1 million of funding from our Water Quality Board to conduct that study, so I wanted to share that with the council. So the 2014 algal bloom that occurred in Utah Lake triggered us to start really thinking about how we might work with local health departments and the state health department and other stakeholders to advise the public about risk associated with harmful algal blooms when they occur. And so we developed in partnership with the Department of Health guidelines that are primarily based on this table that comes from the World Health Organization and has been adopted by a number of other states and countries to kind of guide decision-making in the moment when a harmful algal bloom is occurring. Now, one thing to keep in mind is when an algal bloom occurs, you collect data, you take it to the lab, you take samples, you take it to the lab, you analyze the data. That all takes time, and in the meantime, there's a risk to public health. And so we have a tiered system that we've developed, and it's really a recommendation to the local health departments about how they might make decisions to inform public health. So those decisions are all made by the local health department, and I have to say Utah County Health Department has been an outstanding partner in all of this. So basically, we start with a threshold we have thresholds for cyanobacteria. These are the bacteria, the algae themselves. There are also criteria or thresholds for microcystin, which is one of the 4 different toxins that we can measure that can be produced from an algal bloom. And then there's corresponding chlorophyll A. Our procedures are based on cyanobacteria themselves for several reasons. One is we can collect these samples and have them analyzed within 24 hours here locally in a lab in Orem, so we can make decisions really quickly. There's no lab in the state of Utah that can do these toxin analyses just yet. We have to ship them out. They're very expensive, $500 to $700 per sample to a lab in Florida. This summer, we were challenged by the fact that that lab was also analyzing all the data, the samples from the Florida bloom, and so we weren't able to turn those samples around as quickly. They're still very helpful to have, but we use the cyanobacteria as our thresholds.
So that's simply to state there is cyanobacteria in the water.
And that there's a risk to public health. So what the World Health Organization has done in their epidemiological studies is looked at when you have these, this is all probabilistic, this is not cause and effect, but when we have concentrations that exceed, say, 100,000 cells per milliliter of cyanobacteria, there is a moderate to high probability that there could be an adverse health effect to the public. And so that's the kind of information that then the health department makes a decision around whether they should issue a caution sign, a warning sign, or a closed sign. Right. The closed sign that we recommend, or the danger that was posted for Utah Lake, is based on that very high threshold, so over 10 million cells per milliliter, which we did observe in a number of our samples in Utah Lake this year.
And that's just the fact that the cells are there, not that there's necessarily a
correct
toxin.
That's right, because
just that the cells exist.
Correct, because we know that first, and I'll talk a bit about what we saw in Utah Lake, but the cells themselves in concentrations at these levels, 10 million cells, the bacteria themselves can cause health effects. They're not quite as severe, they're not toxic, they're not causing liver damage or neurological damage, but they are causing gastrointestinal symptoms, rashes, if it's inhaled, it can cause a problem. And so it's probabilistic. No, we don't know for sure that someone would get sick, but just like your health department regulates restaurants, we take the precautionary approach. And
right.
So that's what guides that.
Yes. The challenge I have with that, again, is I have to tell, I'm saying me as I'm talking, but I mean as a body. Sorry, Mayor. We have to go to our citizens, and at least so far technology-based has been what's been advertised.
Yep.
I think there may be other ways out there than just technology. I don't think technology is always the answer for things. but we have to be able to tell our citizens, you're paying this much money on technology based off a probability that there may or may not be a toxin in your water, simply based on the fact that...
So I'm going to get to the linkage between nutrients and
Okay,
algal
all
blooms.
right, 'cause
Right
that's-
here, at this point, we're just talking about making an advisory to the public based on the conditions in the water. And I'd encourage you to invite the health department, Utah County Health Department folks to come down and talk to you. Would be very concerned about liability issues and public health risk if they were to just leave the lake open when they know that there's a high probability of human health effects. So they have to take that precautionary approach. We did see toxin. I don't have the toxin data here, but we can provide that to you. We did see toxins. I think that's a common misconception, not in every sample in Utah Lake, and certainly not at the very beginning, but we did see concentrations of toxins that were of concern to us. So we were able to test out this new framework of advising the public on health risks associated with algal blooms sooner than we had hoped this summer with the Utah Lake bloom. I don't think you need a lot of background on exactly what happened there. You were all familiar, I'm sure, with the closure that occurred. This is the records these were the calls that were made into Utah Poison Control Center. The Utah Poison Control Center received over 600 calls as of the beginning of August, so we haven't updated this. Hasn't been a lot more since then. Concerned about exposure to the harmful algal bloom in Utah Lake. Of those calls, 31%, so about 200 of those calls were cases where people were reporting actual symptoms of primarily gastrointestinal symptoms, skin rashes, some headaches and dizziness, and ocular or eye irritation. So again, we know that these symptoms can be caused by the bacteria themselves. I think that's a common misconception that you have to have toxins to have a health effect. You have toxins, you have a much more concerning health effect with respect to liver damage and neurological damage. But if you're a recreator, I don't think this is the kind of experience we want people to have at Utah Lake, is to come out and get sick, even if it's just for a couple of days. That way? There we go. Just to give you a sense, this is the data mapped out in the first week of the bloom. So the 100,000 is our cutoff for where the health department, we encourage them to put some sort of caution or warning sign out. And you can see the orange dots on that first map show you the extent of the concentrations that were at that level. So this was not isolated to one particular part of Utah Lake. It was extensive throughout the lake. Obviously, we had the highest concentrations up to over 40 million cells per milliliter in some of these samples here around the state park. The health department, the reason they closed the day they did, there was a triathlon planned for that bay that Saturday, and they were very concerned about people getting exposed. So then the blooms sort of started to dissipate and started to move to focus in the south, and we saw concentrations well above 1 million at Lincoln Beach through the rest of the summer. And so the health department kept that closed and opened the rest of it and left up the caution signs, kind of following the tiered approach. So we've kind of talked about this a little bit, but I want to recognize that there are many factors that affect an algal bloom, and we recognize that. We can't control all of these. So warmer temperatures, lower lake levels, perhaps there's something we can do with water management in terms of how much water is delivered to Utah Lake out of Deer Creek. And climate change can affect some of these. Now, we don't have, as local and state officials, we don't have control over the weather. We don't have control over precipitation. What we do have control over is this particular factor, which is the nutrient loading to the system. This is the food source to the system. And I know there's been a lot of debate and discussion about the linkage between nutrients and algae. And although Utah's waters are unique, the mechanism for growing algae in water is universal. You need a food source for that to occur. So this was a paper published in 2008 that we'd be happy to share with the council. It's a scientific consensus on harmful algal blooms globally. And I just want to point out a few of these points: that increased nutrient pollution promotes the development and persistence of harmful algal blooms. Large harmful algal blooms, like we saw in Utah Lake this year, require an external source of nutrients to be sustained. So if you think about the sources in the late summer of ongoing dissolved nutrients into a system like Utah Lake, wastewater is one of those contributing factors. It's an ongoing source. Stormwater, spring runoff, those are temporal sources, change over time. Wastewater is an ongoing source. So to feed a bloom like we saw this year, and to feed it for as long as it was going, requires an external source of nutrients.
So my question then is, what external source shut down Payson Lake and Schofield?
So Schofield, we do have, we've been working there for 15 years on agricultural sources. So we have actually a good number of cows that graze actually below the water line at Schofield. We have erosion in Mud Creek that is partly natural and partly aggravated by grazing practices there. We've done a lot of work to try and restore the loading there. That particular reservoir now has legacy nutrient issues as well.
Okay.
So it's not all natural, and it's not a natural lake either, right? It's a reservoir, so it's...
Right, but now like Payson Lake was shut down, there, you might have some cattle grazing, but we're talking, and it's been mentioned so far, for future growth and development.
Yep.
To save the waters.
We're looking at...
Cattle have been around a lot of these water sources for years and years and years. Watershed sources, reduction of nutrient inputs from watershed sources, that's not a wastewater facility.
It's not always a wastewater facility. In much of the state, these are non-point source issues.
Right.
And in Payson Lakes, we're looking into what it is, but in terms of the concentrations of cyanobacteria and the length and extent of the bloom, I don't think we've seen anything in Utah like we saw at Utah Lake.
Is there historical data as far as other algal blooms in our water bodies in the state historically?
I'm
sure they've existed.
I'm sure they've existed too.
Cyanobacteria have been around
Sure.
for millions of years.
Sure. Let me talk a little bit about what we know about
Okay.
Utah Lake historically. We collect regularly as part of our regular monitoring program phytoplankton samples. We haven't in the past targeted blooms. These are very difficult to sample because you have to find them when they occur and run out and collect a sample. And so I think this year, because of the publicity we got at Utah Lake, we got a lot more of the public aware and called in Payson Lake, called in Manaway Reservoir, Schofield Reservoir, and so we were able to get samples during a bloom. In the past, we have samples, but we don't necessarily have them during bloom events.
Right. If nutrients are increasing, because, and I'm worried about Spanish Fork City, because Spanish Fork City's wastewater treatment facility is pumping as part of the 75%, wouldn't the algal bloom be increasing every year so that it wouldn't be, well, we rely on the public to let us know? It would be a quantifiable. This year it's 80% coverage. This year it's 35%. This year it's 9%.
If it were that, well, we don't have the data to look at that question. I'd love to have
So
that
if we
data.
don't have the,
But I would point back to these other factors. So it isn't a one-to-one. It isn't simply that if you reduce nutrients by 30%, you'll reduce the algal blooms by 30%. It's not a one-to-one. It's a very complex relationship. But we do know that if we don't reduce nutrients, we're going to continue to see these kinds of blooms. And if we increase nutrients, and Walt will present what the nutrient loading will look like to Utah Lake in the next 50 years if we don't do anything.
right.
We know we'll have, we know we have more frequent and higher magnitude blooms in our future.
Well, I submit that we suppose we will have more frequent and higher blooms, because you said that we don't have that data. It's not a one-to-one because of the 75% influx. Therefore, we have this type of growth every year. Then we have to tell our citizens, you're spending you are responsible for a part of millions, if not billions of dollars of technology based, when maybe we wait a little bit and just kind of monitor and adjust. We see what's happening. You know what? it is a cycle every 15 years. And then maybe, maybe there's a secondary or tertiary effect as to why we have those types of
Let's look
issues.
at the growth
Okay.
projections for Utah County and the load projections and maybe go from there. And we want to answer a lot of these. So a lot of these questions and these complexities we can capture experimentally and through modeling. And that's our intent in this study that we're funded with $1 million for the next 3 years.
Right, but as we do that, there are so many controls that you can't adjust
Sure.
for.
I mean,
Sometimes you just simply need time to observe, do something.
Well, but we've
monitor
observed,
and
and we,
adjust.
without being argumentative,
Oh,
we've
no, you're
observed
fine.
problems in Utah Lake for the last decade. So this is not a brand new problem. The fact that we've had this large algal bloom this year has sort of overshadowed the concerns that we already had for Utah Lake, and I'll talk
Right.
about some of those.
And I like debating, so I don't take it as argumentative. 10 years referring to watershed, water issues in an ecosystem is a hiccup.
So
So that's my question. We have millions, billions of dollars that our citizens will have to pay for.
And
for
right,
something
so right now, we're talking only about implementing the technology-based phosphorus effluent limit. So that's the $3.87 that Walt spoke about. Our study will help us identify if we need to go further. So I don't know about these hundreds of millions and billions of dollars. We haven't made any kind of regulation that would force that kind of investment yet.
Well, yet, and that's my concern.
And the yet will be determined by this study. And so that's why we wanted to come here now before we start the study, to make sure we capture all of your concerns and that you guys are well
So will $1
engaged.
million help you make this study to tell us what we're going to
I
have to
think
do
it's
for
gonna-
years?
it's gonna
How far
take
will
us-
$1 million go?
I think it'll go a long ways. One benefit we have is the University of Utah just secured a $1.2 million grant from the EPA, independent of us, to do the modeling. That would have been the most expensive part of this study. So they're going to do the modeling in partnership with us and our stakeholders, and we think $1 million can take us a long way towards answering these questions.
and I
But I
think
want to assure you, we will never have 100%. People keep saying we need proof that if we do X, then
Sure.
Y will occur. It's sort of the analogy Walt sometimes gives is, if you don't plow your roads, you probably will have more car accidents in the winter. If you do plow your roads, can you guarantee there won't be a car accident? No, but can we guarantee that the frequency and magnitude of those are lower? Yes.
All right, well, I'm just saying, I think we all want clean water. There's no question about it, and we want Utah Lake to be a place where we can, I used to water ski there when I was a little kid, and so stuff like that. And, we got a resource there we want to protect. There's no question. And that's why I think we want to make sure we do it right, and that's why I question, is $1 million enough? Because to do the technical studies that we need, and as good stewards, we talked about being a good steward. Well, we have to be a good steward to our citizens here. And so we got to go to them and say, okay, this is the best study that's been out there. And our deal is, I don't want to rush into something, but I think we need to look at it. And I agree there's a problem out there, but let's not go so fast and say, okay, this year the state said we're trying to hit 1%. Wasn't that our original?
1 milligram.
1
per liter.
milligram, yeah.
And that
So
was,
now we're saying in 5 years, you got to hit 1.8, or we're going to get you down to
we're not saying that
0.1.
yet. That's what our study will help us determine.
Well,
All
and that's
we're
what I'm saying.
Today
But
is-
that's where we're hearing that's where you're trying to get to. So it's going to cost more than $8 a household. If we're going to get to 0.1, it's going to cost upwards to the 32. So we need to make sure the studies are done properly and right,
Yep.
and not based on, well, we think that this might be it.
Yep.
So if the studies come out and show you, well, maybe we don't need to move that fast, are we going to say, let's not move that fast? Because I know
Absolutely.
government has always said, EPA and no, we got to do it now. And it affects a lot of people's
Sure.
lives.
No, I understand that. And if you look back at this slide Walt put up when these EPA regulations first came out, it was 12 years ago in 2004. And we haven't done anything other than talk about this and pass this one rule since 2004. So to say that we're going fast, I think is...
No, I'm not saying on that. I'm just saying this here, all of a sudden, you're showing us data from Wisconsin, and okay, 5 years, you gotta be down to 0.8, and another 5, you gotta be point here, and then,
I think Walt's point there was that other states are being much more aggressive about nutrient
okay, well, I don't care
reduction, and
about
we're
the other
not-
states.
we're
I really,
not-
I care about Utah,
we're
and I
not
care
out
about
of step
Spanish
with the
Fork.
rest of the
And so,
country. Yeah.
that's all the point I'm trying to make, is I wanna make sure we get the right data.
Sure.
And let's move
And we agree,
cautiously
and
and
we agree.
slowly, and
We want to do that.
and
But
let's
what we
do what we
can't
need
do
to
is
do.
get into analysis paralysis where we study for 15 or 20 years, and in the meantime, the population of Utah County doubles, and we're doubling the load to the
Well,
lake, and
and-
then we hit a tipping point where we can't go back.
And if we're having an algae problem every year, I'd say, yeah, let's go full steam ahead, you know?
Right.
So, yeah, so I think we got to be adapted to
Yep,
that. So
sure.
study, and then if something happens, then move that study up a little quicker, you know?
Yep.
I mean,
we could put our $1 million in another part of the state if, we've dedicated it to Utah Lake because we see this as a real problem and a real place where we need to invest in water quality improvements. And we want to do it as in a science-driven,
Right.
way. And so that we are, it's kind of a big deal for us to take $1 million out of our hardship grant and put it into studies. And we think it's worthwhile and valuable to do that for Utah Lake.
okay, well, and we appreciate that.
So.
Yeah, so that's great.
So the study, the goals are to evaluate the role of excess nutrients on beneficial use impairments and to identify the appropriate in-lake nutrient endpoints. And those nutrient endpoints will then be used to derive any future nutrient permit limits. But we haven't said what those are yet. We don't know what those are yet. Why did we pick Utah Lake as our first place to do the site-specific standards? This is a step after the technology-based phosphorus effluent limit for reasons, really. One, it's something that we're on the hook for anyway because we've had Utah Lake on our list of impaired waters for 12 years now. We have new nutrient-related impairments this year, and I'll talk a little bit about what those are. The recent harmful algal bloom events have caused us to prioritize Utah Lake. And then this is one I think that you'd be interested in is providing regulatory certainty. So one thing we've heard from some of the other communities around Utah Lake is it doesn't work for us for you to implement this 1 milligram per liter and then in 5 or 10 years or 15 years tell us to do something more. We want to know what the end game is right now. We want the study done now so that we know with certainty what the limit will be. And then we can build in compliance schedules to accommodate the costs.
You told me you couldn't give us certainty what it's going to be. I'm
Well, the
confused
study-
with that statement. Well, the study, okay.
The study will
But that doesn't
provide.
tell me what is,
I can't tell you today what your limit will be, but the reason we're doing this study is to provide that certainty to the communities around the lake. And then that doesn't mean you'll have to meet the limit the next year. Then that's our permitting folks will work with your wastewater folks to accommodate whatever kind of compliance schedule is
what are we
appropriate.
requiring our waste treatment plants that are permitting right now? What's we requiring them to do?
For phosphorus?
Yes.
Nothing.
So when's our next one?
Next one will be actually 2021.
So by then, we probably will have.
Well, our
the study
phosphorus,
done.
yes. So our phosphorus rule requires that all the facilities meet the 1 milligram per liter by 2020, January 1st of 2020,
22, okay.
period.
Thank you. I just wondered.
And we intend for our study to be done by 2019 or 2020. And there are some communities in Utah County that are looking at applying for the variance to 2025 so that they can incorporate the findings of this study into their planning for their new facility. So, that's an option. So how does this all fit? This is kind of Clean Water Act 101, just to give you a sense of where standards are and where the TMDL is. So basically, we identify the uses of a water body. We develop standards. For example, we have 140 standards for metals, ammonia, nitrate, et cetera, for all of the waters in the state. Then we collect data. We assess those waters against our standards. And if we find that they're not meeting, we put them on our list of impaired waters, and we develop a TMDL study, and then we implement that study through permit changes and through non-point source incentive program. I want to emphasize we have both numeric and narrative water quality standards, and right now the harmful algal bloom that we observed in Utah Lake is a violation not of our numeric standards but of our narrative standards. So these are the listings right now for Utah Lake. So Utah Lake's protected for Infrequent primary contact recreation, we'd actually like to upgrade that use to 2A, which is a frequent primary contact recreation, which is more protective for people swimming and water skiing. We have a 3B use, which is for the aquatic life, the warm water species of game fish. We have a 3D use that protects for waterfowl, and then 4, which is for agricultural uses. And one thing we really learned during this last bloom is that the algal blooms don't just affect recreation and aquatic life, they also affect the agricultural sector. So we have these older listings from 2002 for dissolved solids. This is salts, total phosphors. The total dissolved solids is an agricultural standard, and we're looking at doing a site-specific standard for Utah Lake because we don't think the standard that is set for the state is achievable for Utah Lake given its natural salinity. 2010, we added an impairment for PCBs in fish tissue. We're working on getting additional samples to see if that continues to be a problem. We may be able to remove that listing. And then we have in our draft integrated report that just closed for public comment last month, 3 new listings. So in Provo Bay, which I believe Spanish Forks discharge eventually makes it to Provo Bay, we have 2 new listings, one for ammonia and one for pH. Those are numeric standards that were violated in the last 6 years in the bay. And we added an impairment for the harmful algal bloom affecting the recreational use. Because the lake's been closed, because of the danger signs and the warning signs, we feel that the harmful algal blooms have caused an effect on the ability to use the lake for recreational purposes. So you asked about historic trends. We actually do have 3 studies that have been done looking at the conditions by taking cores out of Utah Lake, looking at the conditions and the natural ecosystem of the lake. In 1970s, a BYU professor, Dr. Brimhall, found that the lake was less turbid in pioneer times. 2 other studies, Ballard in 1974 and Macharia in 2012, these are both PhD theses from the University of Utah, found that Utah Lake used to support more of an aquatic vegetation and less of an algal-dominated ecosystem. Also supported Bonneville cutthroat trout. And since European settlement, the algal composition has shifted to species that we find in more highly enriched or polluted conditions. And these are more the cyanobacteria, the blue-green algae. And we've seen that the levels, the magnitude of algal growth has increased since pioneer times. This is a question that we'll be funding as part of our study to do a more detailed paleolimnological study. So that's looking at the kind of the sediments and the cores to see what else we can tell in terms of nutrient concentrations that would have been the natural condition for Utah Lake.
Has the lake gotten warmer and more shallow since that time as well?
Warmer, I can't answer. More shallow, certainly, because we're using and diverting a lot of the water in the watershed.
So I'm still trying to justify money that our citizens have to spend on something that may be occurring naturally, regardless of the nutrient deposition.
So
because if algae's been increasing since that time, and we know during since European settlement, it was this large, deep, giant lake with all sorts of vegetation growing around it. Community has changed that. Ecosystem has changed that.
Yep.
I'm still looking at, I don't see the need for us to spend a bunch of, a certain amount of money on something that naturally may be occurring and that we don't see a one-to-one
so what our model
ratio anyway.
This model that the University of Utah is developing will help tease out the relative importance of depth, temperature, and nutrients. They're all important. We can't control all of them equally.
Right.
So, but I can't answer that today. That's because we're coming to talk to you about the study before we do it.
No,
but I hope that when we come back in 3 years, we can answer that question. So in terms of stakeholder involvement, we have assembled a group as part of the Utah Lake Commission Technical Advisory Committee. At our first meeting last November, we had 50 people attend, which I think is more than come to the typical Technical Advisory Committee meetings for the Utah Lake Commission. So a lot of interest in this topic. Those groups, those representatives have varying interests from local municipalities and utilities to the POTWs to local universities, consulting firms, advocacy groups, and then obviously all of the state, local, and federal government representatives that would be engaged. We've committed for the first year, before we start the $1 million study, to do some preliminary work we're calling phase 1. The first task is to assemble all of the data that we can put our hands on in the watershed so that we all are working with the same data set, synthesize the studies and information that have already been done on Utah Lake so we don't reinvent the wheel and waste our money that way. Assess the beneficial uses. That's reflected in the integrated report that I talked about earlier. Refine the load analysis, and Walt will talk a little bit about the point source loads at the end of our talk here if we have time. And model selection and development. And we're almost done with these 4 tasks. We hope to have those published by the end of the year, and those will then inform what questions and what studies we fund with our $1 million. Here are some of the broad questions that we intend to ask with the $1 million. Nutrient dynamics. How do the internal lake processes, so these legacy sources of nutrients, affect nutrient cycling and bioavailability? What are the ecological influences on water quality conditions? We know that it's not just nutrient management, there's water management that is a player here. Fisheries management, actually. The whole carp removal project has an impact on turbidity, and it's all connected. And so we want to look at it holistically together. And then ultimately our goal is to identify appropriate in-lake nutrient targets for Utah Lake accounting for climate change. This is a figure that CH2M Hill put together that I really like that shows if you get phosphorus concentrations below 0.1 micrograms per liter in the lake, and we're about there in Utah Lake, but they're above 0.025 milligrams per liter, then you have an opportunity to flip between a turbid lake, algal-dominated system, and a vegetated clear lake-dominated system. So we're in that window, and there's similar thresholds for carp, and the carp removal project's actually getting very close to the threshold, which is 100 kilograms per hectare of carp biomass. And so we're getting to the place where we see a real opportunity to manage the lake in a way that could be much better. I want to remind the council that it's not just Utah Lake that we're paying attention to. Utah Lake exports about 80 tons per year of phosphorus into the Jordan River system and ultimately into the Great Salt Lake. Phosphorus is conservative in the environment, so every pound we put in today is in this system somewhere, unless it's been removed in the form of carp or plants or something like that. And we see these problems materialize not just in Utah Lake. We've had the blooms we've talked about here. In the Jordan River system, we've seen blooms as well. The bloom from Utah Lake permeated through much of the canal system in Salt Lake County, so these are very much linked systems. We see blooms in the impounded wetlands around Great Salt Lake that are fed by the Jordan River and Farmington Bay itself. All right, back to Walt to finish up. If you can stand a few more.
We're worn out.
No.
We've got more
I don't
overloaded
think
here.
he's worn out.
We'll let you have Councilman Scobes out in the hall.
Can I go through a couple more slides that kind of specifically speak to Spanish Fork?
I'll hold you to 2.
This is where we were 115 years ago. I don't know what it would be to have the job on the sewer farm. That's a different kind of agriculture, I guess. But this is out on I-15 and Redwood Road is where Salt Lake City took its wastewater. And it was called the sewage farm. We saw our first wastewater treatment plants in the 50s and 60s. Typically, these were trickling filter plants, and they would remove BOD and suspended solids, and then the water would be disinfected, and we'd discharge it. We saw regionalization with the Clean Water Act coming into play in the early 1970s, so we saw regionalization. So in Salt Lake Valley, we have many fewer number of wastewater treatment plants than we used to have back in the 50s and 60s. And now advanced wastewater treatment, because of us living in an urban environment the way we do, more population along the Wasatch Front. We're one of the most urban states in the entire country. We wouldn't normally think that, but it's requiring advanced treatment because we're not making any more water. And so with the increased growth, we've got to treat to a higher degree the wastewater we have just to stay even. this is what the Utah County population will look like in the next while. This is where we're implementing the technology-based limit in 2016, or 2014. But in this basin, 176% growth is what we're going to realize over this time period. And again, we're not making any more water, and so just to stay even, our wastewater treatment plants have to do a better job at treatment, or we'll be going downhill. So these are the 7 wastewater treatment plants. Salem is a lagoon system. They've recently come to the board to put in a mechanical treatment plant. But you see the other communities around the lake, and the amount of nutrients, both phosphorus and nitrogen, that we're putting in, total phosphorus being the first number, total inorganic nitrogen being the second number in terms of tons per year. So this is going to increase unless we begin removing those kind of nutrients. Right now, in 2010, 13.5% of the water in Utah Lake, it was treated effluent. All things else remaining the same unless we start putting more water into Utah Lake, over a quarter of our water in Utah Lake is going to be wastewater. That means there's an increased load, and we need to do something about that increased load, or we're going to lose ground. So this is based, all of these numbers here are based on an oxygen consumption potential. That is not a term that may be very familiar to you, and it may not even be very familiar to the wastewater folks, but this is a metric that is used to understand the pollutants that draw oxygen from our waters. And so those pollutants are BOD, standard pollutant that everybody is familiar with. Ammonia, and you've got an ammonia criteria, that's a toxicant we already spoke about. Nitrate plus nitrite, when we talk a little bit about treatment, and when we take the ammonia and oxidize that ammonia, we call that nitrification, and so we remove ammonia through nitrification. And total phosphorus then also draws oxygen from our water. So all of these parameters reduce the oxygen in our water. All these treatment plants are meeting their permit limits, but not all wastewater treatment plants are equal. We see some of the older treatment plants, and Provo, a trickling filter plant, Spanish Fork, a trickling filter plant with some other technology with that. North Davis, trickling filter plant. Some of the, Moab, a trickling filter plant. This older 1950s and 1960s era technology does not remove some of these pollutants, phosphorus, nitrate, nitrite. It may not do a very good job on ammonia, although they may do an incredible job on removing BOD, which is typically the only thing in the permit that many of those wastewater treatment plants have. But we see some of the newer facilities, Orem upgrading with an oxidation ditch, East Canyon an oxidation ditch, Hiram with a ditch and filters, and so on, Colville ditch, South Valley oxidation ditch, Magna. Those are capable of removing these other pollutants, the nitrogen compounds, maybe not phosphorus all of the time, depending on if they got filters, etc., but certainly ammonia and the nitrogen compounds. That slide gives you a perspective. All of that was in terms of milligrams per liter. So it discounts population, it discounts flows, it just puts everything on a comparison relative to the amount of those oxygen-reducing compounds that are being discharged. Just like with our bridges, we need to invest in our infrastructure. We do that in our highways and our bridges, in our air quality. If we don't invest in technology to remove those pollutants, we're going to have these kind of days. And similarly, if we don't invest in removing pollutants that cause these kind of problems, they are just going to persist in spite of flows, in spite of temperatures. This is what Spanish Fork City looks like, population, and depending on where you get the population figures, you will be able to tell me much better than I if these are ringing true, but based on the Governor's Office of Planning and Budget, we see population serviced in 2000. You've seen dramatic growth here. This community has changed, I'm sure you'll recognize, over the last 30 years and will continue to change over the next 30 years. Right now, the plant is discharging on an average about 3.81 milligrams per liter phosphorus. you would have to get down to 1. That's a significant reduction in the amount of phosphorus that is being discharged. The total inorganic nitrogen is fairly high at 24 milligrams per liter. So while you're removing some ammonia, and this is the average of the ammonia that you've got here, you're moving some ammonia, nitrogen compounds are blowing out the back end. So you're nitrifying ammonia and reducing ammonia, but not denitrifying. And so what happens is nitrates go out the back end of the wastewater plant, another pollutant. Flows are about 4 million gallons. I think the design capacity of the plant is about 5 million gallons. So just looking at the population curve, you would probably have 8 more years of hydraulic capacity in this plant before something needs to occur. I can't speak of where you are biologically or with the other pollutants. Ammonia is going to be a concern because there's a new ammonia standard coming out that is going to make it very difficult for this plant to meet that ammonia standard. That's independent of anything we're doing. That's an EPA criteria for ammonia, and many wastewater treatment plants.
Real quickly on that slide.
Sure.
1 part per million is what's been discussed.
For the phosphorus.
Yes. My question is, why? If we don't have blue baby syndrome, which was at the beginning of your presentation, if we don't have that at 3.81, why are we going from 3.81 to 1? And where's the study that says that's the beginning? That's where we need to begin.
Right.
Why not 2.2? Why not 1.8?
I'm going to turn that around a little bit. I mean, there are many analogies for that. Why is in a school zone the speed limit 20 miles an hour? Why is it not 25? Why is it not 15? Why is it the same in an elementary school zone as it is in the high school? Wouldn't there be less risk for high school folks? And, you know, it's like, why is the minimum bar that this wastewater treatment plant in Spanish Fork, as well as any other wastewater treatment plant in the state, why is it Utah's secondary standards of 25 milligrams per liter BOD, 25 milligrams per liter suspended solids? And the answer is that is an affordable, reasonable place to put that bar, and that bar is a one-size-fits-all. We looked around the country to say, if we need to buy ourselves some time, so why 1 as opposed to 0.5? I mean, we could have done what Maryland did or some of the Chesapeake Bay states and been more stringent. We said, what's everybody else doing for a technology-based limit? And across the board, 1, nobody was above 1, and 1 seemed to be a reasonable thing in concert with our stakeholders in wastewater treatment plants. That seemed to be the reasonable target. That's where we went. It is not based on a study, on a science-based. It is based on what's reasonable, doable, cost-effective. That's where we landed.
The argument could be 2 is much more cost-effective than 1, though.
Oh, sure. Well, we could say 10, and everybody meets it.
But 10 you would have problems with blue baby syndrome.
Well, the blue baby syndrome is about drinking water and protecting our drinking water sources. Utah Lake right now is not a surface water source for drinking water, or we'd be looking at something much more stringent than this. So it's not, the purpose of this is not to protect groundwater or surface water from blue baby. It's to protect the ecology, fishery, agriculture, etc. So I'm going to end just with these 2 slides. This shows the progression of flows where Spanish Fork is going to be going over the next 35 years or so. Those where your flows are. This last slide then shows if we put in a phosphorus limit of 1 milligram per liter, that's where the line would be relative to the loading of phosphorus. I think it's around 35 or so pounds per day. This buys us time. The progression right now, where you are and where you will be, this shows where you will be if we don't abate, if we don't put any parameters. If the 1 milligram per liter was not met, if you continue with 3.8 milligrams per liter phosphorus and your flow and population increase, this is where you will be in 2050. This shows us kind of holding the line and the reductions that will occur, over time just by the natural growth that goes, even if we stay at 1. So it buys us time. At this rate, if we have 1 milligram per liter, in 2050, we'll be about where we were phosphorus-wise back in 2000. So it buys us some time. You know, we need, and then we're looking towards, again, the Utah Lake study to see if we need to, and that's a big if. Maybe the answer is we don't need to do anything more, and we're fine with that. We're not pushing towards doing anything more, but science has got to drive the decision making. I think we all agree on that.
Well, and
so
maybe by then technology will come and, you know, treatment plants now are a lot better than they were 50 years ago.
Sure, they absolutely are.
So technology might be something out there that we don't even know that'll take a lot of that stuff.
I hope so.
And that's a real quick question to you, Walt. Will your study, because I don't think any of us are saying that we would shy away from good data. I think we thrive on good data in Spanish Fork, and that's a history we really have. When we get good data, we do act on it, and it makes us a better place to live. So I don't think any of us are against good data. We just want to make sure that's good data. Will your study take into account some of the technology we've been introduced to and seen as of late has been the opportunity for us to reuse a vast majority of our wastewater and not produce, you know, a whole lot of effluent going to Provo Bay? So will your study take into account the factor of if that's more cost effective for our city to put that back into our secondary irrigation system with those nutrients and water our lawn again and make them that much greener and everything else, not drink it, but put it back into our secondary irrigation system? What would that do to the ecosystem currently of Provo Bay, of Utah Lake, if our effluent isn't contributing there?
Right. Certainly, that's. I think that's an important element. In fact, our strategy right now considers if it's more cost-effective, for instance, for one community to step up. Let's say there's a community right on the cusp of needing to do something, upgrade a treatment plant, where another community 5 years ago upgraded, and boy, it's going to be costly to now do that again. That there could be a nutrient trading aspect. In other words, one community stepping up and doing more than they need to do and selling credits, if you will, back to the community that says, look, that's the most cost-effective thing to do. So trading would come into that. This whole, I'm aware, and I went out and had the ability or the opportunity to look at the technology that I think came, that recently you've looked at. There's a lot of technology out there. I was very impressed to see that at the South Davis plant. I think it's been piloted at Payson here, Central Davis, very, very successfully. You actually producing algae that you harvest, and it becomes an asset like biosolids. Who knew that biosolids 20 years ago was going to be from this side of the ledger, costing us money, to this side of the ledger, that we can sell it as a resource. So certainly all of that will be considered.
In the study.
Yep.
Thank you.
Well, we are so grateful for the time that you've given us. We didn't anticipate taking this much time. I hope it was educational. We want to open up the communication lines. There will be no surprises for anybody. We want to keep everybody abreast. We're very transparent in that regard. That's kind of the hallmark of what we're doing, and that's why we're meeting with communities and holding these meetings to answer questions so that nobody's caught off guard when we do something, and if we do it, you're going to see that coming, and we're going to be able to answer questions. And so we're grateful for the time you've allotted tonight. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor, can I ask him one question? It'll be fast. My question will be fast. I hope the answer is too.
Well, the question will be answered fast.
You said something about 2 phases, and you mentioned the dollar for the $3 or whatever for just the phosphorus. Did I miss the second one? And the phase 2?
There were 4 alternatives that were looked at when we did this study. The bottom rung of the
You need to talk into the mic. Where you were, right there.
I'm sorry, I'm wandering.
You're on TV.
I'm on TV too. Well, I would have been nervous if you would have told me everything.
Start over.
Thank you.
Start over.
There's only 7 million people watching you, so don't get nervous.
So there were 4 options that we looked at as far as treatment. The first rung of the ladder was hitting a 1 milligram per liter on phosphorus.
Right.
Then the next rung of the ladder was if we hit phosphorus and nitrogen, but not to a very strict degree. So I think it was 1 milligram per liter on phosphorus, and probably 20, I think, is what we did total nitrogen. And then the third rung of the ladder is if we just do phosphorus, but we do it at 0.1, and then the last rung of the ladder is 0.1 for phosphorus and 10 total nitrogen, I believe. So, and the costs go up. When you start talking removing nitrogen, the costs go up.
So you didn't talk a whole lot about the removing nitrogen. Does that mean that that's not something you're focusing on right now? You're only doing phosphorus?
The only thing we have on the books right now is phosphorus at 1 milligram per liter. Our intention had been, on the heels of phosphorus, wait a couple of 2 or 3 years and do the next rung of the ladder, which would have been 10 milligrams per liter total inorganic nitrogen.
Okay.
But there was, I wouldn't call it a firestorm, but there was concern. And so we backed away from the total inorganic nitrogen technology-based limit, focusing just now on phosphorus. There are no plans right now to move ahead with the total inorganic nitrogen. But sometimes when these plants are upgrading, the one goes with the other. And so, pardon me? Pardon me? Oh, our study will look at both nitrogen and phosphorus.
Because that's the one that I think will cost
more.
Significantly more, 4 times, 5 times more, 16-ish. Right, okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Kier, just to answer one of your questions.
Yes.
My family used to drive from Lake Shore to Lehigh on the lake. We don't do that no more. It is getting warmer.
Okay. Dave, they took all your time, just so you know.
So noted.
So, thank you. I'm glad you could do that.
Nothing earth-shattering here, really just view this essentially as kind of the next logical step. Any millennials that have grown up in Spanish Fork, non-millennials will recognize a couple of photographs that we have that I think do a better job of describing what we're talking about than plans.
That's me, walking down the street.
So in the interest of time, really, this is what we're talking about. We're not talking about changing how people use any part of Main Street, really, doing anything dramatic, just simply identifying individual parking spaces once again on Main Street, like was done a long time ago. This photo and one other. Tyler, maybe.
Dave, do you know why they did that? It helped us when we dragged Main to have our spot and line up our couches and lawn chairs. So are we going to incorporate that back into letting our children drag Main?
You know, there's a meeting next week.
Lieutenant Johnson.
Things have changed on Main Street.
Wait a minute,
This hasn't been done
I have
for a
data
while.
that says, I have data, real data that says that dragging Main was a great way for couples to meet.
I was going to say to create marriages.
Family.
Right.
I mean, you could do a marriage show. I mean, forget this women's issues show.
Yeah.
Let's do
There
you
you go.
could do a marriage show.
Let the guys do a drag Main segment.
Talk to Pete Hansen about that one.
You have data that
Where's
says
Pete?
that the marriages are still intact.
I do
Travis?
actually. That's the crazy thing. Yes.
Sorry, Dave.
Sorry, Dave.
Hey, that's still part of your time's been gone.
This is good, we think. We'd like to do it again. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
So you take out, so you essentially get rid of the white line that's there now, that's just really anywhere parking, and then just go in and paint.
I thought I could maybe
Spot.
skirt that in the interest of time, but
Okay.
to get to that, and maybe if you could pull up. Sorry. Just any of the sheets from the plan view, like maybe sheet 3, 4, 5, something along
This
those
is what we're
lines.
planning on here after here,
It'll look a little different than that.
because
Down a couple more, and get a little bit, get warmer. There, that's great. So these marks here, those would match essentially what we saw in the photographs. And they'd be accompanied by a bike lane. So the innermost line towards the center of the road, if you will, would be close to that white line where it is now, and you'd have another line just to identify where that lane is. Now, the beauty of the bike lane as a part of this project, in my mind, really doesn't have anything to do with encouraging additional cycling on Main Street, although it might be nice for that purpose. Really, it just helps, I think, more than anything, identify exactly where cars belong and where maybe people can feel comfortable navigating relative to backing into parallel parking spaces and things like that, and probably even would have the effect overall of reducing travel speeds a little bit on Main Street. Probably not enough to where it'd be really noticeable, but anytime that perceived corridor that motorists have to travel in is narrowed a little bit, we tend to slow down.
3rd South to 8th North?
Excellent question. So the idea relative to the bike lane is to go from the trail on the south end of the city near the bridge all the way to I-15. And then for the parallel spaces, we'd start at 1st South and go to 4th North, at least for now, and just leave it at that.
Maybe 3rd South.
Whatever the city manager says.
Yeah, we learned about that.
Go back to the picture. So if you, sorry, but this is good. This is good stuff. They need this. So if you can imagine, there's a white line today, right here-ish. And so that white line would stay there, and a second white line would be painted here-ish. And then these crosses that you see, we're a very religious city. We've been so since the 80s. Escalante and Dominguez started it all, right? But those lines would be there, and they would essentially push the car in parking where they belong, closer to the curb.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and in some areas you got to be careful not to go into the ditch.
So the bike path would be like right here, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Would there be enforcement issues with someone that's got a dually, king cab, long bed that doesn't fit inside the two crosses?
Well, back then they didn't have four-door dually long bed.
Right.
So when you get one,
I'm not sure what
you can ask that question.
specifications.
There are a couple of different options that you have to meet
Are you done, Mayor?
design criteria for parallel parking spaces. You go, for example, 22 feet in length.
Well, and my question is, I can see someone parking over the cross, whether they have a large truck or not, and then having someone honking and either they get a ticket or arguing over it. I'm just curious if we do this, if there's an enforcement
I think
issue.
you're gonna have to make the stalls plenty big.
We're going 24.
24 feet.
Back in the 70s when we had this, we never had an issue. There was never an issue. There was never an issue.
Fair enough.
24 is great, Dave.
24 feet.
Funding?
Yeah, we'll ask for that, and we might ask for a little more funding to do some red curbing around intersections and maybe some signs. And again, any questions?
The hope with this is to actually make parking easier on Main Street because people will have delineated spaces.
Yeah. So you got problems right now where
we actually think it might
So this'll
improve the number of parking stalls because there won't be funny spaces that occur.
You're done. You're done.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dave.
Hey, Dave, thank you for
You
bringing
good with
us.
that? If you're good with it, we'll continue to pursue with
Yes.
UDOT and move forward.
All right. That'd be good.
So do you want a historical note here?
Yeah, we know what that is.
It's MVP, Davis Furniture.
Okay, but upstairs used to be a doctor's office many, many, many years ago. And there is an unsolved murder on the books of Spanish Fork that took place there.
Night watchman got killed there.
Seriously?
Serious.
Yep.
Does he haunt the store?
Nobody knows.
And nobody knows.
Lieutenant Johnson?
Reopen it.
Cold case. There's a cold case for you.
After
All
you're
right.
Done, after you're done with the parking stalls,
I move we
you
go
go
into
solve
closed
the
session.
I second that.
Got a motion by Councilman Gordon, a second by Councilmember Beck. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We're now adjourned to closed session.
We go on somewhere else?
So let's do one item in here, and then we'll go into my office. We'll retire to my office.
Is it going to be a short item?